Hello everyone, I'm Lao Gao. Today, we're going to talk about someone we've mentioned many times on our channel, Darwin. Darwin was a famous British biologist, naturalist, and geologist. His most well-known work is On the Origin of Species, which everyone knows. He is also the founder of the theory of evolution.
What exactly is a naturalist?
A naturalist is basically someone who knows a bit about everything. But aside from these titles, Darwin also had another nickname. He was considered the greatest NET of the 19th century. This NET was Darwin, full name Charles Darwin. His father was a very famous British doctor named Robert Darwin. It's said that his father earned about £3,000 a year from his hospital, which, compared to today's prices, would be equivalent to an annual income of about $1 million. And on top of that, he had other investments, so the family was really quite wealthy. In fact, at its core, the Darwin family was one of the most prominent families in Britain. They had a very close relationship with another family called the Wedgwoods, and the two families frequently intermarried. One of the most notable figures from the Wedgwood family was Josiah Wedgwood, known as the father of British ceramics, a super wealthy man. Because these two families kept intermarrying, the result was that they eventually became a single family, known as the Darwin-Wedgwood family. This family produced many scientists, artists, and industrialists. At least 10 of them became members of the Royal Society of London. The Royal Society is basically the equivalent of a National Academy of Sciences in other countries. It's the highest academic institution in the UK and also the oldest academic organization in the world. As for Darwin, he never had to earn a living or look for a job his entire life. All of his living expenses came from his father and his mother. Well, his mother was also from the Wedgwood family, and she was like a lady of high society. So, there was no shortage of money. But because all his money came from his father, when he was young, he had no way to choose his own path in life. It wasn't like he could just do whatever he wanted. His father had everything planned out for him. His father wanted Darwin to become an outstanding doctor, just like himself, so he sent him to the medical school at the University of Edinburgh. At that time, the University of Edinburgh's medical school was the top medical school in the world, surpassing even Oxford and Cambridge. Actually, Darwin had a brother named Erasmus Darwin. If you look up Erasmus Darwin online, say on Wikipedia, the person you'll find isn't his brother. The one you'll find is a famous British physician, poet, inventor, and botanist named Erasmus Darwin, who was actually Darwin's grandfather. His brother and his grandfather had the same name. In fact, Darwin's father and his father's grandfather also shared the same name. In this family, there were several people named Robert Darwin, and quite a few named Charles Darwin as well.
Exactly the same.
But the middle names were different. So Darwin's grandfather was also a very famous person in Britain, an expert in medicine. In fact, everyone in Darwin's family, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, grandmothers, maternal grandparents, they were all wealthy people. Grandma, right. Actually, Darwin wasn't a kid who was particularly good at studying from a young age, even after he was sent to one of the world's top medical schools. I felt extremely unhappy and bored every day. Darwin was afraid of blood, so he wouldn't even watch any of the school's experiments. Whenever they had to dissect a corpse, he'd get scared and run away.
Danger.
Yes, blood, afraid of corpses.
Is being afraid of corpses normal?
Remember when we talked about Da Vinci before? His name sounds similar, right? Da Vinci especially loved dissecting corpses. He was always looking for bodies to dissect. So, after Darwin's father saw that his son really wasn't suited for studying medicine, he started thinking of other paths for him. He decided to have Darwin study theology instead. To get Darwin into the best theology school, he aimed for Christ's College at Cambridge University. He even hired a tutor for him, and also made sure to build good connections at the school. Basically, as long as your grades weren't too bad, you could get in. So he got in just like that, whether he was really qualified or not.
I don't know how to put it.
You might have noticed that Darwin's father seemed to treat him especially well. Why is that? Actually, there wasn't anything particularly special. His father was good to all his children. He had an older brother, as I mentioned earlier. That brother was also first sent to the medical school at the University of Edinburgh, but he just fooled around there and didn't study. So their father transferred him to Christ's College at Cambridge. It was the same story.
If you didn't do well in your studies, you go study theology.
Right. His father wanted him to try all the best majors. If one didn't work, he'd switch. His older brother was different from Darwin. His brother wasn't obedient, while Darwin was. That's why their father had higher hopes for Darwin. Later, after Darwin went to Christ's College at Cambridge, he ran into his brother there. His brother told him a secret: you don't need to work so hard. Dad has already set aside enough money for us to live comfortably for life. After hearing this, the two brothers just played around every day. In fact, that's how it really was. His father had left him a lot of money. I'll tell everyone in a bit exactly how much his father left him. So, since Darwin and his brother were just hanging out every day, they felt that studying theology was pretty pointless and instead spent their days observing flowers, birds, fish, and insects. Later, Darwin recalled that the happiest thing for him at Cambridge was collecting beetles every day. Then, when Darwin was 22, something happened that completely changed his fate. This event was that there was a British ship called the HMS Beagle, which was preparing to go on a round-the-world voyage. Well, it wasn't exactly a trip, it was more of an expedition, and they were looking for a partner and had their eye on Darwin. Darwin himself was also very eager to go. Why did they choose Darwin? Because he had money. But Darwin's father was firmly against it, because this round-the-world voyage would take 5 years. Once you left, it would be 5 years at sea, and no one knew if you'd live or die.
It was really dangerous.
Back then, people didn't even know what places were out there, or what other continents existed. They'd only heard from Captain Cook that there was a place called New Zealand over there. That's just how it was back then. Captain Cook went in 1771, right? It was in the 1800s that people started to learn about the outside world, all through Captain Cook's journals and books, just those kinds of things, about those faraway places. Yeah, and there was even a place with lizards over 2 meters long.
It was like going to the moon today.
Yeah, exactly. He really wanted to go. But his father wouldn't let him, so he came up with an idea. He went to his uncle. His uncle was wealthy. He told his uncle he wanted to go, and his uncle was totally supportive. Then his uncle went to his dad and said, just let him go. He's going to be a clergyman, he should broaden his horizons.
Their family is good to their kids.
They really were. His dad said, all right, then go ahead, go broaden your horizons. So Darwin boarded the ship and set out. 5 years later, he came back. As it turned out, Darwin lived up to expectations. During this global expedition, he observed a huge variety of living things from all over the world, plants, animals, and even some geology. He studied a lot, wrote 18 observation journals, and 4 more animal journals and 13 geology research journals. After coming back, he immediately became a famous geologist. Well, 3 years later, at the age of 30, Darwin married his cousin Emma Darwin. Emma Darwin was originally from the Wedgwood family and was called Emma Wedgwood. Before getting married, Darwin received a living allowance of £500 a year from his father, which was roughly equivalent to about $150,000 today. After getting married, this amount even increased by £100. The key point is, his wife also received money, £400 a year, so together, they didn't have to do anything at all. Every year, the two of them could collect about $350,000 from their 2 families. It was completely passive income, they really didn't have to do anything. Since they had so much money they couldn't possibly spend it all, he just used it to buy stocks and bonds. Anyway, he wasn't afraid of losing money, he had plenty.
And then he made even more money. So what could he do?
Yeah, so he really did end up making even more money.
He really just couldn't spend it all.
As a result, all his stocks and bonds soared. The stocks and bonds he bought weren't just random picks, he did his own research and calculations. So later, people would say that what he was truly good at wasn't biology or geology, but investing.
He was the firstborn, right?
That's right. When he was 39, his father passed away and left him an inheritance of £200,000. That's equivalent to more than $70 million US. After returning from his voyage, he spent most of his life studying his specimens, geological and biological samples. All of this eventually led to his book, On the Origin of Species. On the Origin of Species was published in 1859, when Darwin was 49 years old. In fact, when Darwin published this book, he did so with the resolve that it might ruin his entire life.
Ruin his entire life?
Yes, because he knew that publishing this book could subject him to a huge amount of public criticism. So after he finished writing this paper, he tried showing it to some of his relatives and friends, not making it public, just asking, do you think what I wrote here is correct? Is there anything wrong with it? As I mentioned, his relatives and friends were all kinds of people, entrepreneurs, scientists, artists. After reading his paper, they all said it was really well written. It makes so much sense. This is exactly how animals evolved. But are you really planning to publish it? Not a single person who had read Darwin's book dared to publicly support him. Oh, actually, when I introduced evolution before, I mentioned that in Darwin's On the Origin of Species, he never once said that humans evolved from apes. He never said that. In fact, he deliberately avoided the topic. In his book, he only talks about how the species evolved like this, and that species evolved like that, but he never mentioned humans. But everyone who finished reading this book felt that he was trying to say humans evolved from apes. Later on, some people who had read Darwin's book started to get a bit restless. They began discussing privately, saying, hey, have you read Darwin's On the Origin of Species? They say that humans came from apes. Actually, Darwin never said that, but everyone was spreading it privately like that. This was also something Darwin was very worried about.
Why was he worried about it?
Why didn't he dare to publish it? Because at that time, the vast majority of people, whether they believed in God or not, thought that humans were different from other animals. Yeah, it's not that humans are just a little bit better than other animals. In fact, as we mentioned in our previous video about why humans are human, from a physiological perspective, humans are actually weaker than most species. So, at that time, the common belief was that humans weren't simply animals. Some even thought humans might not be animals at all. Humans possess highly developed ethics and a sense of right and wrong, of good and evil. Also, humans are capable of altruistic behavior. People will sacrifice themselves for others, which is something you just don't see in the animal kingdom or in nature.
Don't elephants do that?
No, elephants have empathy, but they don't actually give themselves up for others. You know what I mean? Humans have this trait, so what does that prove? It proves that, at our core, humans are fundamentally different from animals. And the only explanation for this difference is that humans were not naturally produced. Animals all come from nature, they just are the way they are. But we're not like them, which means we weren't naturally produced. So where did we come from? We were created by God. So, the fundamental conflict between creationism and evolution isn't really about whether animals evolved or not. Rather, the real question is, where did humans come from? That's the real point of contention. Now, if Darwin's book never claimed that humans evolved, and instead assumed that humans did not come from evolution, that would also create problems, namely, if all other animals evolved, then why didn't humans? Ultimately, this leads to one conclusion, that humans might have been created by God. So, by implying that humans could have evolved from animals, the theory of the origin of species faced fierce criticism. But this issue was actually perfectly resolved later by another author of the theory of evolution. Many people might not know that the theory of evolution actually has two authors. The other author is Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace was a famous British explorer, anthropologist, and biologist. The book On the Origin of Species was indeed written by Darwin alone, but why are there considered to be two authors? Because Darwin was actually very afraid. As I just mentioned, after he finished writing this book, he originally had no intention of publishing it. He was already satisfied with just having written it. He thought that was enough. But why did it end up being published later? It was because of Wallace. Wallace, like Darwin, traveled around the world. He shared the same ideas as Darwin and also believed that animals evolved.
Yeah, he was also a rich second generation.
Yeah, he was also kind of a rich kid. But Wallace didn't write a paper. After reading Darwin's On the Origin of Species, he thought the book was just amazing. But later, when he found out that Darwin didn't plan to publish the book, he said, "All right, I'll write my own version." So he wrote it and even showed it to Darwin. When Darwin saw it, he said, "Wait, isn't this basically my Origin of Species?" He quoted a lot from On the Origin of Species and said, "I'm planning to publish this. What do you think?" Of course, Darwin said, wait, let me publish mine first, okay? Otherwise, this great human discovery, this potential groundbreaking achievement, would have ended up being credited to Wallace. Wallace said, "How about this? I know you don't really dare to publish it, even though you wrote most of it. If you add a little bit of my stuff, let's just say it's both of ours."
How can someone be so shameless?
No, let me tell you, Wallace was actually extremely important. Why? Because Darwin was a botanist and zoologist. But Wallace was an anthropologist. When Darwin traveled the world, he mostly looked at plants and animals, while Wallace traveled the world visiting different tribes. In the 19th century, London was the most central city in all of Europe, the political, cultural, and economic hub, highly developed. But what did this high level of development lead to? It created a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and made the city especially unsafe.
Unsafe.
Public security was especially bad, because the poor were extremely poor and really resented the rich. They would often steal, smash things, rob, and so on. Before Wallace set out to travel the world, he thought, if even a developed place like England is this chaotic, when I get to those primitive tribes, won't I end up getting eaten by someone? He was so worried back then, but after Wallace traveled the world and came back, he said there was no place in the world worse than London, England. He said that after visiting all those so-called primitive tribes, he discovered something. The more primitive the tribe, the more they understand mutual respect and the meaning of coexistence. Primitive tribes don't kill or wage war for their own development or personal interests. None of that. Even in a tribe of just 10 people, if they eat people, it's only to fill their stomachs, not out of a desire to kill, you know? But nowadays, we can just drop a bomb on someone in a war and kill thousands of people without even feeling anything. They weren't like that. So what conclusion did Wallace come to? The more advanced science and technology become, the lower the spiritual level of humanity. So, even though material things have developed, people's spirits have declined and fallen behind. The reason why primitive tribes are able to preserve such a high level of spiritual civilization is because they have religion. This is the true meaning of religion's existence. Can it teach people to be good? It maintains high character in people. Without religion, if there's only technology, humanity is finished, people become just animals. No matter how tall your city's buildings are, you are still an animal, not a human. So after Wallace published on the origin of species, he especially emphasized that although he was the creator of the theory of evolution, he believed that humans do not fit the theory of evolution, especially the human brain or the spiritual aspect of humans, which completely does not conform to the theory of evolution. In fact, whether you look at fossils or any other evidence, there really hasn't been any fundamental change from the brains of apes to the brains of humans. If there were to be a fundamental change, we would know, where does intelligence come from? For example, if the human brain had an extra part compared to the ape brain, then that part would definitely be where intelligence comes from. But in reality, the brains are pretty much the same. All fossil evidence also shows that humans suddenly stood upright. That is to say, from the moment humans appeared, they already possessed intelligence. And this intelligence has not advanced from ancient times to the present. In other words, ancient people weren't actually dumber, and people today aren't really smarter. We're just building on the foundation laid by those before us, accumulating bit by bit to get to where we are now. If you were thrown into a primeval forest today, you'd also have to start from the Stone Age. Even with all your knowledge, it wouldn't help you much. For example, if you threw Steve Jobs into a primeval forest, he wouldn't be able to make an iPhone. If you put Elon Musk in the forest, he couldn't build a car, and there would be no Starlink project. It's impossible. Everything starts from the Stone Age. So the reason ancient people used stone tools, wood, or iron shovels was simply because they didn't have the accumulated knowledge of those who came before them. But in reality, intelligence is the same, everyone is more or less equally smart. So, fundamentally, the cleverness we show today isn't true intelligence, it's just that we have broader knowledge. Yeah, the more you know, the smarter you seem. People who watch our channel regularly just come across as smarter.
National affairs experts.
That's right. So where does human intelligence come from? Where does noble character come from? It can only come from God, there's no other conclusion. That's why Wallace believed that if anyone wants to accept the origin of species and accept evolution, they must first accept creationism.
Why is that?
Because if you only accept the evolutionary part of the origin of species, that is, if you only accept the scientific part, then you're not really human. You get it? If you look at science alone, that's not the part that makes us human. So before you can prove you're a scientist, you first have to prove you're a person. That's why you have to accept creationism first. It was only after he said this that the Church of England accepted Darwin's theory.
One of the two authors actually rejected the theory of human evolution.
But Darwin himself never said that humans evolved.
But all along, this book has been.
This was just people's speculation at the time. Later, as technology advanced, people gradually stopped believing in theology. What Wallace wanted to emphasize was that without theology, you can't even talk about science. But in fact, do you know how scientists came to be? Scientists were originally theologians. Back in the Middle Ages, the earliest scientists in England were actually clergy from the Church of England. Some of them studied natural science, and they gathered together to form what was called the Society for the Advancement of Natural Science. And this Society for the Advancement of Natural Science is what became the Royal Society of London. The people in the Royal Society of London, who were also high-ranking clergy, said, let's give ourselves a name. What should we call ourselves? Let's call ourselves scientists. So that's how the term scientist came about. Scientists were all theologians, and what were they studying? They were using scientific methods to study the existence of God. That's what they were doing. So from the very beginning, after science was born, people never really doubted the existence of God. There was only one time when belief in God was shaken, and that was with the publication of On the Origin of Species. But then Wallace came out and explained things, and the problem disappeared. Darwin became famous because of this. Otherwise, people would have kept stepping all over him, trampling him down endlessly. Who knows how far down he would have gone.
Extremely successful.
Without him, Darwin would have been finished. Even though he didn't write any books, he played a very important role.
That's right.
This is also why Western scientists still go to church, because their theology and science aren't in conflict. Science is actually built on the foundation of theology. But in the East, things are a bit different, because there are likely to be many atheists in the East.
You say there are a lot of atheists in the East, but even they still have to pick an auspicious day.
That's true. So what Wallace said is right. No matter how much the times change or how advanced technology gets, as long as people exist, then God will definitely exist. And in fact, after the theory of evolution was published, for a long time, all of Britain entered a kind of theological craze. Everyone was searching for answers in science, trying to find God or spirits using scientific methods. What was the most popular thing back then? It was spiritualism. You often see on TV a group of people holding hands, sitting around a table, summoning spirits, or something like that. Well, all those people holding hands were actually scientists. Because if they couldn't prove the existence of God, scientists would no longer be considered human. That's how dangerous it was, you know.
Did they ever find anyone?
They kept searching. Many people came up with all kinds of hypotheses about how to prove the existence of God. We'll talk more about that later. So, when it comes to the topic of spiritualism, I have to especially mention Darwin's brother again. We all just forgot about him earlier, didn't we? After Darwin became famous, his brother also became well-known. Because he was the most famous spiritualism enthusiast in Britain. His brother would go around telling people, "My brother is Darwin. Let's do spiritualism together," that kind of vibe. And in fact, Darwin himself was also a firm believer in spiritualism. Why did he believe in it? He had a rather compelling reason. You see, Darwin and his wife had a total of 10 children.
All with one wife.
Yes, and out of those 10 children, 3 died young. Among them, his second child, Annie Darwin, died of illness at the age of 10. She was also the child he loved most in his life. So Darwin genuinely hoped that spiritual beings really existed because that would give him a chance to see his daughter again. He also sincerely wished that there was a heaven after death so that he could be reunited with his family. His love for his family was inherited from his father. His father was the same kind of person. He spent his whole life working hard just so his children would never have to work and would always have plenty of money to spend. Everything he did was for this, and Darwin was the same way. In his later years, Darwin's annual income was £8,000. That's equivalent to about 2.5 million US dollars. Just like his father, before he died, he made sure to leave enough money for his 7 children so that they would never run out for the rest of their lives. He passed away in 1882 at the age of 73. In his later years, he often said, "All my life, I felt uneasy every day, just worrying about how my children could live without ever having to worry about food or clothing. That was the source of my unease." So, for Darwin, what he loved most in his life wasn't really biology or the origin of species. What he loved most was his family. This is the greatest living off one's parents case of the 19th century.
But he could make money himself.
Actually, you can't really call him someone who just lived off his parents. He was both first-generation rich and second-generation rich. Let me tell everyone something. We've just launched our 5-year-old brand merchandise, including t-shirts and pre-orders. This sale will run until May 31st, and all of our merchandise this time is only available on the Fandora platform. Fight!